Today on the CBS Public Affairs program, Face the Nation. Through the eyes of this television camera, Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, Republican of Wisconsin, with correspondents across the country questioning him. Live from Indianapolis, New York City, and also here in Washington. Here's the moderator of Face the Nation, Ted Koop.
How do you do? And welcome to Face the Nation. Senator McCarthy, on the eve of this historic special session of the United States Senate, called to debate a motion to censor you. Millions of Americans are wondering what it's all about.
That's the very first Face the Nation, which aired on CBS November 7th, 1954, with inaugural guest Joe McCarthy. In that program, he will spar with various journalists over whether or not he should be censured by the United States Senate. For all the McCarthyism stuff, because, as you know, Joseph McCarthy is synonymous with the Red Scare, a period of American history in which anti-communism became so intense, so pervasive, that it undermined the legal and cultural institutions we were defending from communists. An era where people could be canceled, not what they would have called it back then, but that's what they were, and lose their livelihoods based not just on their political opinions, but on political opinions they used to have, or were merely suspected of having. A kind of national witch hunt in which freedom of speech, thought, and political association were all considered collateral damage in the greater fight against totalitarianism. The United States government and Hollywood and quite a few institutions decided to fight for freedom against tyranny by restricting some of that freedom. Something you may not know about Joe McCarthy is that he was pretty good friends with JFK. He dated not one but two of the Kennedy sisters. Both of them hailed from old Irish Catholic families, Joe and JFK, Joe and Jack, and they were both staunch anti-communists. McCarthy would likely have described JFK as belonging to the following category.
Even though I have always pointed out that there are millions of Democrats who are good, loyal Americans, and many office holders here in Washington who are anti-communist.
In the vote that's about to happen to censure Joseph McCarthy shortly after this broadcast on CBS, in what will be the beginning of his political downfall, then Senator John F. Kennedy excused himself from the vote due to health problems, which is entirely plausible. JFK had a lot of health problems. I know that we look at him as this healthy, handsome Camelot figure, but he was actually very unhealthy. He had Addison's disease, as well as a host of illnesses he picked up on his own through extracurricular activity. His brother Robert once quipped, "If a mosquito bites my brother, the mosquito dies." So maybe JFK didn't vote against McCarthy that day because he really did have back problems and he really was in the hospital. Or, also possible, there were political calculations going on. He didn't want to alienate the anti-communists, or maybe he just didn't want to vote against his friend. Now, who you could definitely count on to vote against McCarthy is Senator Lester C. Hunt, a Democrat and a vociferous opponent of Joe McCarthy and McCarthyism. So let's meet that guy on America's very favorite news program.
It's time for the Longines Chronoscope, a television journal of the important issues of the hour, brought to you every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. A presentation of the Longines Whitnor Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honored watch, and Whitnor, distinguished companion to the world-honored Longines. Good evening, this is Frank Knight. May I introduce our co-editors for this edition of the Longines Chronoscope. From the CBS television news staff, Larry Lasser and Winston Burdett. Our distinguished guest for this evening is the Honorable Lester C. Hunt, United States Senator from Wyoming.
Senator Hunt, about a year ago after the election of President Eisenhower, and at which time he received an overwhelming majority in your home state of Wyoming, you said at that time that you felt he'd received a mandate from the people of your state and you felt under an obligation to support whatever policy he offered. A lot of things have happened since then. Are you still an Eisenhower Democrat?
Well, I must modify the statement you've just made by saying that within the limit of my conscience, I would support the president. And up to date, I have found no reason to change that position.
The good old Longines chronoscope. Care of Longines watches, the world's most honorable watches. Lester Hunt was an outspoken opponent of Joe McCarthy. They had instantly disliked each other in the U.S. Senate. Hunt thought McCarthy was a bully, and it got worse from there. He proposed a law that would restrict congressional immunity, allowing citizens to sue individual members of Congress for slanderous statements, which was a direct shot at McCarthy and his allies in the Red Scare. He called Joe McCarthy a drunk and a liar, which today would be pretty tame, maybe even kind of friendly banter on the Senate floor. But back then, them's was fighting words. And if there's anybody in the U.S. Senate that you can count on to vote against Joe McCarthy, it is Lester C. Hunt. Except he doesn't. Because by December 2nd, 1954, the date of that censure vote, Lester Hunt was no longer serving in the U.S. Senate. On a Saturday morning in June, just a few months earlier, Hunt had entered his office at the U.S. Senate, where he picked up a .22 caliber Winchester rifle and shot himself. Hunt was not a communist, or even a suspected communist. He was not a victim of the Red Scare. But he was collateral damage in something larger, more insidious, and more totalitarian. And that is what we're going to explore today, right here on The Political Orphanage. Hello and welcome to The Political Orphanage, a home for friendly political mutants and a production of the Longines Wittenauer Watch Company, maker of Longines, the world's most honorable watch, because that's what people want in a watch, right? Honor. When you think of watches, you don't think of accuracy, glamour, or price point. You think honor. I'm your host, Andrew Heaton, a Longines watch of a man, if ever there was one. And on today's program, we're going to be discussing the Lavender Scare. And I'm going to give you a homework assignment. By the end of today's episode, I want you to, for yourself, answer the following question. Which was worse, the Red Scare or the Lavender Scare? By whatever metric you like, keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, having charged you with this assignment, let's meet today's guest. My guest today is Jonathan Rauch. He is a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. Yeah, got that right. At the Brookings Institution. He is a contributor at The Atlantic and also took me out to lunch before we started talking, which I wish would become standard practice on the show. It would be great if all my guests took me out to lunch.
I not only took Heaton out to lunch, I took Wallace out to lunch.
That's right. And then I drove Jonathan to my studio where he was suddenly afraid I was going to murder him.
Well, just because, it's kind of behind the shed, behind the back, across the railroad tracks.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a house, but I promise I am not the Sweeney Todd of podcasting.
Well, when you get inside, it kind of opens up like the TARDIS in Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Pretty spectacular within.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it doesn't look too impressive from the outside, but it looks pretty good on the inside. Well, I wanted to talk to you today because I read a piece that you wrote in The Atlantic recently. I believe it's titled, America Should Apologize to Gay People. And I already knew that the American government and American culture had been homophobic. I was aware of that. But there was a sort of degree of it that I was unfamiliar with. And I had not heard of a thing called the Lavender Scare. I've heard of the Red Scare, where, McCarthy was putting commies or supposed commies in jail, blackballing supposed commies. But I hadn't heard of the Lavender Scare. So can you walk us through what that phenomenon was?
Yeah, this is something that even most gay people are not fully aware of. Not even I was fully aware of the dimensions of what happened until I did the research for this article. I am going to claim on this show for these listeners and back it up that the American war on homosexuals was America's purest experiment in genuine totalitarianism, in marshaling every force of government, society, culture, even science and the medical establishment to eradicate homosexuality, and that the dimensions of this remain underappreciated to this day. Americans have never confronted it. They have never apologized for it. We do not know the names or the numbers or the stories of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people who are affected. So do you want the short headline version, or should I kind of walk through the history in a more deliberate way?
We'll do both, but first I want you to clarify, because it's a bold statement to say that America's purest totalitarian moment was with the war on gays, for lack of a better term. And so, like, when you say totalitarian, my not knowing the ins and outs of this, I totally agree and acknowledge that the American government had hiring practices that, were opposed to gay people and didn't allow for gay marriage and things like that. But when you say totalitarian, I think of like George Orwell or the Soviet Union, or something that goes beyond being mean to being actively mind controlling and ruining. So how do we get there?
Well, that's exactly right. I should be clear that what happened to gay people in terms of murderousness and cruelty does not compare, for example, to slavery, nor does it compare with the forced march of, for example, the Cherokee tribe and what was done to Native Americans. And we don't want to be in the business, really, of comparing these things anyway, because they're all different. But what do I mean by totalitarianism? I mean that when that's creating an environment where it's not just that an individual or a group faces some amount of discrimination or disadvantage, but when all of society is marshaled against them, so there is literally no place that they can turn for safety, not even their own homes are safe. That means they can't go out and meet and socialize in a club. They can't go to a park and socialize or attempt to have a date or hook up for sex. It means they're not safe in their workplaces because they can get fired for who they are. It means that if they call the police are not going to protect them. If anything, will persecute them. It means that they are not safe anywhere. There is nowhere in society where they can run and be themselves, live in themselves. And in that sense, yeah, it's Orwellian.
Yeah, that kind of like going beyond not enjoying full rights and privileges to actively attempting mind control, or maybe mind control is not the word, but
no, it is the word.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just getting into your head about it, and
the very first gay civil rights case ever filed was by a man named Frank Kameny, who was fired from his government job for being gay in the late 50s, and filed a brief before the Supreme Court, which alas did not take the case. But one of the things he says in that landmark brief is not just that he wants his job back. It's not just about workplace discrimination. He says that what's happening here is the government is trying to control the mind of its citizens by eradicating the very idea of homosexuality, making it literally unthinkable, and erasing homosexuality as an identity throughout American society. Not just about firing people from some government jobs. That's the Lavender Scare. It goes much further than that. It's psychiatry. It's the medical establishment. We were considered insane. We were forced into treatment and so forth.
Well, and that's late in the game where that changed, right? Because the standard manual for psychiatric conditions is the DMV. I think that's right. If I got that right, the DMV, and we're now on the DMV-5. And I want to say when I was a kid, like I was born in the 80s, like homosexuality was still technically considered a mental condition according to the DMV.
Yeah, it's the DSM,
Excuse me, DSM. I'm thinking of the Department of Motor Vehicles,
yeah, which
also
is almost
horribly homophobic.
Yeah.
but yeah,
I was going to say, I'm not sure which one I would rather have an encounter in a dark alley. Yeah, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is what the psychiatric profession relied on then and still relies on, classified people like me as mentally ill until 1973. I was 13 years old. I grew up well aware that if I ever revealed to any human being, including myself, that I was attracted to boys and men, that I could face a future of being forced into some kind of psychiatry, or at least being viewed as a sociopath. homosexuals were excluded from immigrating to the United States on grounds that we were considered mentally ill and sociopathic. And that was actually the world I was raised in.
This might be beyond the scope of the article you wrote recently, but I'm curious. America has multiple kind of intellectual cores to it, but one of the cores is this Enlightenment era, fairly classical liberal, John Stuart Mill, don't worry about what people are doing unless it's actively hurting other people. Like that is a strain of American thought that I'm very partial to. So in the early American experience, did it start out super homophobic and just stay that way up until it's just been a gradient of improving? Were there places where it was fine? Have there been ebbs and tides?
So it's really the opposite. This is something I was fascinated to learn when I did the research for the article. America did not start out particularly concerned about or interested in homosexuality. It had laws that were called sodomy laws, but they were primarily used to prosecute cases of sexual assault. That began to change in the latter half, especially toward the end of the 19th century. That is the late 1800s, when you begin to see urbanization, which means you begin to see congregations of gay men. And you also see psychologization. You see coming out of Europe the idea of homosexuality as a thing, not just a practice. It's not just some horny kids who are getting up to no good behind the barn, but it's begins to emerge as something of an identity. And this begins to attract the attention of forces of conformism in society. And they begin prosecuting sodomy and prosecuting homosexuality. And that ramps up gradually starting in the 1890s through the 1920s. But until then, it's still pretty uncommon to see police forces and vice squads that are terribly interested or upset about homosexuality. It's really in the period right at the end of World War II where we see the beginning of what I call the war on homosexuality at full scale and in full force.
That's fascinating to think that would come from urbanization. Normally, I would assume that urbanization would lend itself to a more cosmopolitan worldview, but and
it did. And it also, of course, brought the backlash to the cosmopolitan worldview.
Okay.
Homosexuality became more visible. You began to see gatherings of men in bar. You began to see cross-dressing.
Okay.
You began to see drag.
Whereas previously, your village might have a gay guy in it, or maybe two, but it's low enough you're not really thinking about it, you're not worried about it.
And probably the person wouldn't have identified as gay or might even have been married, right. But, we had these euphemistic terms like lifelong bachelor.
Right. And also, this is really getting into history. I suspect there's a point where we transition from thinking of homosexuality as an activity to an identity.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of British history, and James VI of Scotland / James I of England, who the King James Bible is named for, was probably, I guess, bisexual would be the way to put it now, because he definitely had kids, but he also...
Yeah, he was probably gay, I think, right?
He was in a torrid relationship with the Duke of Buckingham, but when you read how people viewed old Uncle Jimmy, he's a good guy, he just likes a bit of buggering. And that was kind of but it's not a thing he is, it's a thing he's doing. And at some point that shifted into an identity. And I wonder if that's where the really, really visceral anti-homosexuality came about. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's in this period, late 19th, early 20th centuries, that you get the term homosexuality, you get the psychiatric community becomes involved, it becomes a diagnosis. And precisely because it's identified in these laws as sodomy, buggery, because it begins to get prosecuted, that also leads to the rise of a community in response to that, because now we're identified in society as a group. So these things are all going on. Then World War II happens, you get the mobilization of lots of men, they congregate in cities, they go off to war, discover each other. The war distracts America during the late 30s and early 40s. But then comes the end of the war and a couple things happen. First, you get demobilization. America turns back inward. It starts looking again at its domestic order. And second, you get the war on communism. You get the beginning of the Red Scare. And for reasons I don't completely understand, in Americans' minds, homosexuality and communism become intertwined as dual and related forms of subversion. They're both sinister forces that are here among us, within us. You don't know, maybe the person next to you, maybe the person at work might be a subversive, and they kind of meld into this impression that there's an enemy within, a sinister force that is undermining our values, our national spirit, our patriotism, subverting our children. This becomes entwined together. So you get all of those things going on at once, and starting in 1945, you get the first federal clampdown, the beginning of what comes to be known much later as the Lavender Scare. You get the announcement that the military will not allow homosexuals to serve in the military. Shortly thereafter, you get the development of rules that the government will not hire homosexuals. You get bans on homosexuals coming into the country on the grounds that we're sociopathic. Congress holds hearings in the early 50s in which a State Department official testifies that they have identified and rooted out 70 plus homosexuals. The official at the State Department is trying to reassure Congress, we're on top of the problem. We are going after the subversives. But the reaction is the opposite. Congress thinks, oh my God, 70-something homosexuals, that's the tip of the iceberg. There must be many more. So Congress begins going after homosexuals. Dwight Eisenhower, one of his first acts, great president in my view, but one of the most obscene acts of civil rights violations in American history, signs an executive order banning homosexual people from government employment. Unconditionally, you can be an alcoholic, you can have mental disorders and still work in the government. Homosexuals, absolutely out. So in 1953, the government really goes to work just ridding the government of homosexuals. The FBI, meanwhile, is headed by someone who is very likely to have been gay, J. Edgar Hoover.
Great guy.
Starting,
what a Mitch.
Starting in the 1940s, the FBI makes a priority of going after communists and homosexuals and other subversives. Hoover writes a memo, which has come to light since then, ordering FBI offices around the country to submit lists of known homosexuals and circle their names in green pencil. Hoover was a weird guy. The FBI starts going after homosexuals, so thousands of people are eliminated from government employment during this period. We don't know how many, but estimates are 5,000 to 10,000. But, should I continue or do you want me to pause for breath?
Keep going.
All right. So that's the Lavender Scare proper. It's the federal government's attack on homosexuals, trying to weed them out of every part of life. But that becomes the cue for state and local governments and law enforcement to get into the act. They realize that the country is full of these subversives. So state after state begins passing and enforcing sodomy laws that criminalize homosexuality. By 1960, in all 50 states, homosexuality is a crime. Usually
not just old buggering and sodomy laws, as previously discussed, used as a way to mitigate assault, but actual homosexuality.
Actual homosexuality. Now, in some of the states, it was public homosexuality, like sex in a park. But in many
as opposed
states,
to wholesome heterosexual sex in public parks and playgrounds.
Right. But in a lot of states, it did not have to be public homosexuality, even in the privacy of your bedroom. If you had the bad luck to be discovered, you could be arrested and hauled off. And in fact, that happened to people. So there was literally no place where you could be safe as a gay person. But it wasn't just rules on sodomy. The much bigger mobilization of government, they had a whole suite of laws against things like nuisance, public indecency, exposure, obscenity laws, and so forth. And they weaponized this entire suite of laws so that, for example, socializing in a club or a bar, you'd get raided by police. Everyone in the bar would be swept. You'd be hauled off in a paddy wagon, booked often on a misdemeanor charge, but your name would be published in the paper and you'd lose your job the next day. Often you would lose your family because your parents would turn their back. You'd sometimes have to leave polite society altogether. This would happen with, lewdness, obscenity. Obscenity laws were enforced in those days. So there was literally no place that you could go, no place you could exist as a homosexual in American life and be safe from this web of laws. And local, state, federal communicated with each other. So, for example, Florida set up a special commission to persecute homosexual people. You won't be surprised to hear that it began. This commission was called the Johns Committee. It was a state commission. It was initially created to harass the NAACP, but it very quickly pivoted to what it thought was an easier target, which was homosexuals in government, teachers, professors. It created networks of informants, kind of like East Germany, and it would haul in, Andrew Heaton, and say, we have information that you're...
I've figured, I'm not gay, but I've had 6 birthdays at a gay bar, so I presumably, if we were living in this Orwellian world...
They could haul you in, or they'd haul me in, and they'd say, okay, Heaton, here's the deal. We have reason to think that you're a homosexual or have engaged in this conduct. Have you or haven't you? They would grill you for hours at a stretch, and then they'd say, we might let you off if you will reveal the names of all the other people that you've had sex with. And you'd be terrified. And you would often do that.
And I assume I don't have an attorney.
Of course you don't have an attorney.
The attorney's not going to represent me anyway.
Right. Of course you don't have an attorney. You were told you didn't need an attorney and that you would be all right if you told the truth, which, by the way, was a lie. But since homosexuality was illegal, the last thing you wanted to do was be prosecuted. So you would give up the names of other people. They would go round up those people. They would fire people by the dozens. They would terrify the others. And then they would report the names if they discovered through these networks that some federal employee, for example, not a state employee, was gay. They would report that to the FBI, and then the federal government would take care of interrogating and firing that person. So they were using these informer networks to trace right through society and try to figure out who is gay and go find these people and weed them out. So by the early 1960s, between local, state, federal law enforcement, networks of informants, the psychiatric establishment, which was using psychiatry to quote unquote treat homosexuals, sometimes using procedures like lobotomization and electroshock. That wasn't common, but it was certainly done. The forced use of hormones. And these things all interacted because one of the things that could happen to you if you were arrested on a homosexual charge is you were given a choice, prison or psychiatric treatment. So you could be packed off to a psychiatric hospital. That happened too. Meanwhile, you had pop culture, which was demonizing homosexuals, making it out to be something horrible. You had private employers. If they found out you were gay, they would fire you. So what I'm trying to describe here, it's hard for us in 2024 to get our minds that this could happen in America. But you can think of this as something like East Germany under the communists.
It sounds very Stasi, of informing on other people. And
it's not centrally coordinated like Orwell's 1984. There's no one ministry that's in charge, but it's this coordinated network at every level of government and every level of society that is intertwined to eliminate homosexuals and homosexuality, the very idea of them from American life.
I want to backtrack a little bit because I want to kind of understand, if possible, where this massive homophobia comes from. It sounds like I would have guessed prior to talking to you that we start peak homophobic and that it's just a gentle slope downward to the current day. I would have thought, Puritans homophobic, and then we read John Stuart Mill and we keep, eventually we watch Modern Family and go, they seem fine. Doesn't sound like that's it at all. It sounds more like what happens is that as populations grow, like basically homophobia rises in proportion to awareness of homosexuals in our society or historically in our society.
Yes, and the emergence of gay subcultures, gay people trying to socialize with each other. And a lot of it seems to, I don't really think that I know the answer to the question you're asking because it's a very big and deep question. But some of it has to do with panic over gender nonconformity. one of the things that was prosecuted, and there were actual laws against this, were men dancing with men, women dancing with women, men dressing like women, women dressing like men. This was seen as profoundly threatening to many Americans, and by the way, still is.
I totally buy that. I mean, I realize that there are a lot of people that have full PhDs on this subject, and I'm not one of them, but I think it's rooted in misogyny or rooted in gender ambiguity. There's a wonderful, I like reading historical fiction, and there's a wonderful series called First Man in Rome by Colleen McCullough, and it's all talking about, Roman history around the period of Julius Caesar. And like for the ancient Romans, there are fellators, which or a fellator, and we're going to have to get into some mechanics here, listeners. So sorry if I say anything. This is all clinical, but there's fellators, so like blowjobs. And the way the Romans looked at it was it wasn't the act of a man and a man doing something. It was who is playing the woman and who is playing the man. So if you were a male that was inserting into a man, you're fine. You're being the dude, but that guy is acting like a woman, and therefore that is perverse. And I think a lot of that, like when I worked at Fox Business, Shep Smith was, I don't want to say an open secret because it wasn't even a secret, but he's gay, and it just wasn't really talked about on the network, but everybody knew about it. And I don't think that would have bothered most people that were homophobic, because Shep Smith is way more masculine than I am by any metric. He looks like a Marlboro Man cowboy. And so I think that homophobic people would maybe see him and go, well, that's fine, because he's cowboy hat, square jaw, smoking a cigarette kind of guy. But when you start seeing a guy act like a gal, then it really bothers people. There's something about that stepping out of the prescribed gender norms that really alarms people.
Yeah, I'm sure that's a piece of it. Something that gay people used to frequently encounter and still do as gay male couples is someone would say, well, which one of you is the woman?
Yeah. I'm told by my gay friends that whenever they would come out, that the first thing all the straight people would want to know was the intricacies of their sex life.
This weird fascination. And by the way, we shouldn't leave out the role of religion. I don't highlight it in my article because there's only so much you can do in 5,000 words. But churches, Christians especially, took up anti-homosexualism as a cause in the 20th century. And when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, you could literally not turn the radio dial on a Sunday without hearing someone preaching against homosexuals. It was thought that homosexuality was a temptation that was undermining and destroying the American family. This kind of weird concept that everyone would be gay if you let anyone would be gay.
Right. That it's going to spread like a virus, and you can convince young men, you could logic them if they were left with.
So you tell me, but circling back to kind of the critical point here is that all of that would have been problematic and bad for gay people, but it's a world of difference when you mobilize the forces of government at every level, not just federal, but state, local, and law enforcement. You mobilize the military, which had entire enforcement sections that were devoted to rooting out and driving out homosexual members of the military. This was going on. The military ban didn't end until 2011.
Right.
That's not very long ago.
No.
I count the beginning of the war on homosexuals in its big sense, mobilizing all of society from basically the mid-1940s. And I date its ending to about 2011 as government policy was when the military ban finally ends and we can serve in the military, being who we are. And that's 65 plus years.
Well, the insidious part to me, all of that is bad. The really insidious part of that to me is the soft, non-governmental, cultural antipathy. Because like theoretically, let's say that the federal government has, you can't hold a federal job and you can be prosecuted for bad things, but if you live in Los Angeles, everybody's totally fine with gay people. Not an ideal scenario, but at least you can go to a cocktail party and mention you're gay and you're not going to get in trouble. But it sounds like the whole of the American experience outside of very, very small niches, if at all, it's not like red team was anti-gay and blue team was pro-gay. I mean, it was Hollywood, it was culture, it was academia, it was everything. That there was no quarter.
Yeah, there's no quarter, and it's all of the above. That said, the thing that you're really terrified of is not just disapproval. It's not just that going to a bar means that you're part of a subculture and you're disreputable. It means that you are quite likely to be arrested. I mean, I have a cousin. He's alive and well right now. He went to the Deja Vu bar in 1970 in Indianapolis. That night he was tired, so he went home a bit early and just missed a bar sweep. And that's where the police, they invade the bar and they haul off dozens of people. And Mike, my cousin, says many of them were fired the next day. They lost their jobs. They lost their reputations. So it's not just what the government does, but the government activity.
There's like a social death that follows it.
Yeah, and it mobilizes and coordinates everything else.
I would assume that, I mean, the Red Scare plays such a prominent role in American history. I mean, growing up in Oklahoma, the holster of the Bible Belt, which is not routinely lauded as a progressive bastion, I read about the Red Scare, and the consensus was that McCarthy was a bad guy, and that prosecuting Americans or ruining their lives based on a belief is an un-American thing. But I'm guessing that if we had the numbers, that far more people would have been prosecuted under the Lavender Scare than the Red Scare.
Far more homosexuals. Well, again, we don't know the numbers, and that in itself is a scandal. We have dropped this whole multi-decade campaign of totalitarian eliminationism down the memory hole. But yes, the best guess is 5,000 to 10,000 homosexuals were eliminated from the U.S. government over this period. And that's many, many multiples of the number of alleged or actual communists who were eliminated. And here's something most Americans don't know. It's astonishing that people don't know this. In 1954, a United States senator, very popular Democratic senator named Lester Hunt, walked into his office on Capitol Hill with a Winchester rifle and blew his brains out in his office because he was being blackmailed by Republican senators over the fact that his son was gay and had been arrested in a park sweep. Now, you would think that a U.S. senator blowing his brains out in his office because he's being blackmailed over his son's homosexuality would be something people would know about. It was covered up at the time. It was said that he had some sort of, he was having depression or some kind of mental issues, and word was not allowed out. So,
because we hear about Seward, I believe it's Seward that got the snot beaten out of him by some Confederate back in...
I think it was Charles Sumner.
Sumner,
on the
thank you.
floor of the
Seward's
House.
the one who buys Alaska. Sumner, yes. So we know about that one, right? Like, that's an act of violence at the U.S. Capitol.
Yes,
I've never heard about this guy until you brought him up.
Of course. Yeah, it's astonishing. But this goes to the larger point, even larger, I guess, point of my article in The Atlantic is the crime here isn't just what was done to gay people. It's that America as a country has never confronted and acknowledged what it did to gay people. All of this happened. Very few Americans know about it. They have a vague sense that there was discrimination, and then there was a big riot called Stonewall, and everything was okay, and we got gay marriage. The country has never accepted and recognized the dimensions and the sheer horror of what it did. It has never opened the records to understand the numbers of people who were caught up in it, who was fired. We don't know their names. We don't know their stories. The documents are hidden away. There's a wonderful group, nonprofit, called the Mattachine Society of Washington, which is trying to get its hands on some of those records. But to do that requires FOIA requests. Sometimes it requires lawsuits. You've got a few archives in some universities and Mattachine that are trying to get people who have stuff in their attics, you know, the discharge records of Uncle Bob, or the real story of what went on in those bar raids, to turn those over so that we can get some of this. But there has never been a truth commission, for example, that has the power to create an archive, to begin collecting and exploring the documents and surfacing the stories. We don't know in any great detail the numbers of people affected, the lives that were destroyed. And we have not apologized. There have been efforts in the Senate. Some things have been introduced by way of a federal apology for the federal role in the Lavender Scare. They've gone nowhere. President Biden, not too long ago, issued a public statement in which he condemned what the government had done to gay and lesbian people, but he did not apologize for it. Really, yes, I think it's considered politically toxic to be seen apologizing for stuff.
Can you, okay, I'm very open to all of this. If I were a senator, I would be happy to make an apology on behalf of the U.S. Senate or the federal government. That seems fairly non-controversial to me because there's no price tag involved. Like for example, when we get into like slavery and we're talking about reparations, now there's a whole monetary level that we have to suss out beyond just acknowledging an ethical, a profound ethical problem that preceded all of it. It seems to me that talk is cheap, so I'm surprised that would be remotely controversial.
Well, I am too, frankly, Heaton. It's the tradition in America has become that one of the ways that we show our fidelity to our values and our ideals is we do own up to our imperfections. So there have been national apologies to, for example, the victims of Japanese internment in World War II, the victims of lynching, Native Hawaiians, Native Americans. In the 1950s, the state of Massachusetts issued a formal apology to the victims of the Salem witch trial. And this doesn't make us weaker. It makes us stronger to understand where we went wrong and try to do better. That has never been done for gay people, and efforts to do it have so far gone nowhere. Now, Senator Kaine of Virginia, my senator as it happens, says he'll reintroduce his resolution of apology, and maybe it'll go somewhere. There is no money attached. I think that there should be restitution, symbolic at least, financial restitution, not going back 50 or 100 years, but to people, human beings who are alive right now, who were actually discharged from the military because they were gay, or fired from the government because they were gay. People like Jan Kirch. He's a couple of years older than me. He's not old. He's walking the streets right now. His career in the State Department was completely destroyed because he was fired in 1986 because he was gay. Sorry, 1984. Maybe even earlier. These people are among us right now, and I think it would be only right to write them at least a symbolic check from the government.
That makes sense to me. Like, I think reparations for slavery, again, I think is a really complex, tricky subject, and at the very least of it, there's nothing you can do for the actual slaves. They're dead. The injustice is done. There's nothing that can be done for them. We can talk about modern descendants and institutional racism and so forth. For people that are directly affected by a thing, that makes total ethical sense to me. So Elizabeth Warren, who I'm not in the habit of favorably quoting on the show on a regular basis, I thought had a good point a couple of years ago where she wanted to have, lack of a better term, reparations to gay couples that could not marry. And what she wanted to do was, if you had wanted to marry before gay marriage was legal in the United States and you'd been forbidden by that, and you had been denied tax benefits as a result of that, you would be reimbursed for those tax benefits plus interest. And that makes sense to me. That was something that people were deprived of a right everybody else gets to have. It had a monetary element to it, and you could pay back that monetary element with back pay. The folks that you just mentioned that suffered for getting kicked out of their job or having their career modified, who are alive, that makes total sense to me that they would deserve some sort of recompense in the same way that cop shoots a dog and breaks into your house. You can sue the police force or sue the city to get money for it.
One would think so, but recognizing this has been like pulling teeth. During the so-called don't ask, don't tell period in the U.S. military, which began in 1993 and didn't end until 2011. This is when if you were discovered to be gay, you were thrown out of the military. Something like 12,500 people were discharged from the military, and a lot of those people to date have been unable to have their discharges upgraded. Some of them were...
So they were dishonorably discharged.
Dishonorably, many of them, not all of them, many got honorable discharges, but many of them got other than honorable discharges, and as you may know, an other than honorable discharge can be a blot on your employment record for the rest of your career.
My guess is you probably can't get TRICARE. You probably you're not entitled to some of the pensions and things that you would get as a veteran. Yeah.
And that's all correct. And for those people trying to get their discharges upgraded has been a long and slow process. The Biden administration, to its credit, just a few months ago announced a program to try to speed that up. And we'll see if that works out. But the broad point here, it's not about the paycheck. It's not about the money. It is about the fact that so many of our fellow citizens were forced through such a campaign of radical harm and discrimination by our government, many of us simply for trying to serve our government. Jan Kurtz, who I mentioned, was fired in 1982, was the date for being gay. He struggled for 9 years to get his job back. He was forced out to his family, who had not known he was gay when he was fired. His State Department career was completely derailed. For the first year of this, he didn't sleep. He gained weight. He was depressed. These people are among us right now, and I'm one of them, to the extent that I grew up in a world where people like me were thought to be sick. I knew for a fact that I could never be married when I was a kid, that I could never even express who I actually loved for fear of being diagnosed as mentally ill or being made a pariah or perhaps even arrested. So to me, it seems strange and almost, can I say, un-American, not for us as a society to have come to grips with this. We don't teach it in the schools. Children don't know about it. And alas, to some extent, it's being repeated. Groups like Moms for Liberty are going crisscross across the country.
If I were a really smart political tactician in the Republican Party, I would blast this and say, look what evils the government can do to minorities, therefore the government should be smaller or something like that, because the government was a very big part of this. And I do not gather that is happening.
Well, no, that's not happening. The opposite is happening. I mentioned Moms for Liberty and related groups are going state to state to try to remove books that mention homosexuality from school curricula and public libraries and school libraries. There was one state where librarians removed a book by an author whose last name was gay.
Really?
Yeah, they reinstated the book, but what that's telling you is that the degree of paranoia now that is being created out there in the school about anything having to do with gay becoming radioactive because it could bring the wrath of these groups down. So these campaigns to erase homosexuality and homosexuals from American life are not over, and it's, Governor Ron DeSantis and his like who are leading these campaigns.
So can I ask, I don't know a whole lot about these campaigns nor about DeSantis, but I have friends that like DeSantis, and they would probably say that it's not that Florida is trying to erase homosexuality, but rather just keep teachers from talking about sex or sexual instruction in general.
They did say that. What they told us in Florida specifically, Florida passed a bill that was alleged to be targeted to the inappropriate sexual instruction of young kids. And they should not be learning about homosexuality or gender identity in grades K through 3. And he then looks at that and he says that's reasonable.
I'm fine with kids not being instructed in sex through third grade, yeah.
Now, what the bill said, however, was sexual orientation. Do you want to live in a world where the teacher can't have the photo of the same-sex spouse on the desk? But they said, don't worry about it. It's only K through 3. And then the law was passed, and guess what the state did? Would you care to guess what grade that ban was extended to? Pick a number.
I'm going to say 5th grade, so end of elementary
you're
school.
Too low.
Okay. 8th grade?
No, keep going.
12th grade?
12th grade.
Wow.
Yeah. So apparently, a 17 or 18-year-old cannot be exposed to any instruction involving sexual orientation. Now, sexual orientation is not sex. This is not putting condoms on bananas. This is teaching about the Stonewall riot. This is telling instructors to erase homosexuality from the curriculum, even for young adult students, or at least older minor students. I don't think, you tell me, Andrew, but I don't think that's consistent with a good faith effort to protect small children from instruction about sex. To me, that's part and parcel of the campaign that began almost a century ago to eliminate all mentions of homosexuality from American life.
Well, I know we have to wrap up because I have promised, John, to get you back to your hotel in preparation for your speech, so I'll end it. I'll say at the very least, while I'm fine with sexual instruction not going to kids, this should be in history books. Like, if we're going to talk about the Red Scare, which we should be talking about the Lavender Scare, which sounds far more pernicious and pervasive and extensive than anything that happened during the McCarthy era.
Of course it should. And no one's saying take an entire month of the school curriculum and devote it to gay rights. And no one's saying take kids and turn them into, LGBTQIAA plus activists or anything like that. We're just saying America did this thing. And it showed the worst side of itself. And many of the victims, many of the targets are alive and well and walking among us today. And what we don't remember, we're in danger of repeating, and indeed, to some extent, are repeating right now. So yes, let's acknowledge it. Let's confront it. Let's teach it and make sure it doesn't happen again.
All right. Jonathan Rauch, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, gang, before you go, I did a patron survey at the beginning of the year where I asked patrons of the show, what sort of stuff do you like? What would you like to see more of? And one of the overwhelming answers was, we want more historical deep dives and monologue episodes where Heaton spends a stupid amount of time and coffee researching stuff and then explaining it. Well, okay, I live to serve. So patrons, you get a big old Heaton monologue episode this week just for you. And in fact, it's one that a patron specifically requested. It is on the topic of, what do other countries do with problematic statues? You know how we keep fighting about statues of Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson and Whitey Tilkerson and Rawhide McTavish and other Confederates that I didn't just make up right then? On this week's bonus episode, we will visit Taiwan, Russia, England, Scotland, and Ukraine to see what other countries do when they are confronted with problematic historical figures or monsters. We will encounter dictators, a child molester, and, I'm not making this up, Darth Vader. That is this week's bonus episode, a big 2-hour monologue special as a thank you to all of the patrons who support the show. And you can join them by going to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. You know, here on the Political Orphanage, we strive to provide engaging intellectual content which is both accurate and honorable. Like a timepiece from Longines Wittenauer, maker of the world's most honorable watch. If you think we pull off that mission to be the Longines chronoscope of podcasts, head over to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton and support the show. You'll not only make the Political Orphanage possible, you'll also get bonus content. What kind of bonus content? Well, I just said a whole thing about statues and Confederates and stuff. I'm not going to repeat myself. It's a podcast. You can just rewind, Pete's sake. But hey, you know who doesn't make asinine requests like that? Patrons who support the show. And you can finally step out of my ire and into my good graces by going to patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. That's patreon.com/Andrew Heaton. That's the show. Thanks for listening. Thank you, Jonathan Rauch, for coming on to discuss the Lavender Scare. Thank you, Eric Stipe, who edited today's program. And thank you, Longines Wittenauer Watch Company, maker of the world's most honorable watch. Until next time, I've been Andrew Heaton, and so have you.